All right. Hello, everyone. Today's Let's Get Real is going to be about getting back to training. This is a presentation that I've had made for a little over a year now in anticipation of the power station opening, and I'm glad I finally get to give it. So just to give you an idea of what we're going to talk about today, this is mostly going to be geared towards people who have had a lapse in their training since the power station closed. So either, you haven't been doing anything at all since the power station is closed, or maybe your training has changed from a gym-based training program to a home-based training program, or maybe you just started doing something different in the time that the power station has been closed. So I'll talk a little bit about the transition from home to gym training, as well as a special focus on returning to strength training and to group exercise. But just in general, the detraining effects that we'll see, these can happen even after just a couple weeks. So especially if you have changed your training or haven't been doing much training in the past year plus, these will be especially true. So generally, we'll see a decrease in VO2 max and submaximal endurance. So that's a decrease in our cardiorespiratory fitness, as well as a decrease in muscular strength and hypertrophy. So our muscular strength and endurance as well. And then also we will see a decrease in neural pathway strength. So while your cardiovascular system and your muscles will physically uh, get a little bit weaker, the neural pathways that help coordinate those responses to exercise are also going to get weaker as well. And then typically with detraining, we also see an increase in sedentary behavior. This might be especially true if you have been working from home this whole time. And with that, we get a risk of tendon stiffness and muscle imbalances. And then when you do return to activity, the metabolic byproducts won't be taken away as quickly because your system isn't used to removing those byproducts as it was before. So there will be a little bit of delay and a buildup of those metabolic products like lactic acid. So I want you to kind of think about what your new starting point is. So in thinking about this, we're going to think about what our training was like before and what our training is like now, and then what we want our training to look like when we return. Um, So you want to think about the frequency of your training. How many times per week were you doing some sort of physical activity? The intensity of your training, the amount of time you were doing exercise for in a single session, and the type of activity. So you could have changed any one of those four variables since the power station has been closed. Um, and generally, we're going to want to change it when we come back. So if we started out in the gym, let's say, for example, you were doing a lot of weight training before, and then you switched to a more running based training program during COVID and you want to switch back to a weightlifting program, that's a change. So we have all sorts of those kind of changes, even going from weightlifting in a gym to weightlifting at home and then back again. We're going to all kind of have different starting points, different points that we're at now, and different places we're going to want to be when the gym reopens. The biggest thing to worry about is doing too much too soon because this greatly increases our risk of injury for the muscular, cardiovascular, and tendinous systems in the body. It also can increase our soreness. So we've all had those times where we've worked out a little bit too much or tried a new activity and we had DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. And that's the soreness that sticks around for a couple days. It's really severe. Maybe you can't lift your arms over your head or it really hurts to stand up and down from a chair. That's the kind of soreness that I'm talking about with doing too much too soon. And this is bad just because, it's uncomfortable and it's not very convenient, but it also will lead us to non-sustainable training, um, which means we won't be able to get into a habit of building back up our physical activity. So we'll be too sore for, 2, 3, 4 days afterwards that we won't do anything. So it doesn't create a very good habit system for coming back to exercise. And then that can also lead into overtraining, which is a little bit more severe and has other complications as well. So really what we're trying to do when we're returning to training is avoid doing too much too soon. So with that, we're going to have to do a little mental preparation. So like I said before, thinking about what our training looked like in the past, what it looks like now, and where we want it to be. We're going to have to think about that as well as putting up some some barriers for helping us not do too much too soon. So that might be setting a workout plan, monitoring your heart rate, things like that can help us mentally prepare for returning to training, as well as expecting that we're not going to be able to jump back into where we were over a year ago. And then with that, we'll also do some physical preparation. So at the time of this presentation, it's going to be a little bit too late to physically prepare yourself, um, you know, physically to get back into training. But there are some things you can do on a session to session basis, like an extended dynamic warm up, some movement prep and stretching, foam rolling. Those are all good things that will help you get physically prepared for exercise, as well as help to decrease injury risk and soreness. And then we'll have to expect to increase our training intensity over 6 to 8 weeks. So this is likely going to take even longer if you have a change in your training since the power station closed. Since it's now been over a year, it might take even a little bit longer, maybe a few months, to get yourself back to where you were. So you have to keep that in mind and not get frustrated with the process as you're returning to training, so you can avoid not doing too much too soon and you're easing yourself back in. Some special considerations for strength training. So this is going to be for those people who were strength training before and want to return to strength training, and they did something in between, either no strength training or maybe switched from a barbell-based strength training program to dumbbells or body weight at home, and I want to come back to that. So that's the population that I'm really talking about here. And the first thing you're going to want to do is forget for now about your past 1-rep maxes. Those aren't going to help you. You're not going to be able to jump right back in and return to those. And you probably shouldn't even test your 1-rep maxes for a couple weeks or maybe even months when you return to training. Instead, you should try using RPE instead of basing your lifts on a percent of your 1-rep max. So taking that scale of 1 to 10, 1 being easy, 10 being your hardest effort, and use a training program that's based off of RPE. So kind of staying in that 6 to 7 range. So you're selecting a weight based on that. And like I said, with the 1-rep maxes, we're going to avoid training to muscle failure. This is going to help reduce our risk of injury to our muscles and our tendons, as well as allow us to build healthy habits and really increase our intensity over time. You can also increase your rest times when following a strength training program and focus on technique with a lower weight. It's a great time to rebuild those movement patterns, especially because you'll have to re-strengthen those neural pathways that help you perform those motor patterns. And then you also need to have periodization in your program, because that's going to help you increase the intensity over time in a safe and sustainable way. So this really means following a structured program that's been designed by a professional. So, if you are unsure if your program contains periodization or have a question about that, you can feel free to ask me, and I can take a look at it and let you know if it has that element incorporated into it. But it is something you're going to want to keep in mind, because that's going to help you increase the intensity over time and help you get back to where you were. And then our special considerations for group exercise. The things that we're going to be doing is our workouts will be programmed to gradually increase in intensity over time. So they're going to start out, they're still going to be difficult workouts, but they're not going to be 100% max all-out workouts, because we don't want to just throw you back into that, so we can avoid doing too much too soon. And we'll also be using a lot of RPE, so that scale is 0 to 10. We're going to give you some targets to hit. And RPE is great because it can change based on the day. If you're really tired, your RPE might be a little bit different than a day before. If you're feeling sore, the same thing. So you can kind of base yourself on that. Sorry, guys, I lost my screen here. Okay, there we go. You're also going to want to end class feeling like you still could go for another 10 to 15 minutes. So you don't want to reach that failure. We already talked about that. And then one of the biggest things coming back to group exercise is avoiding comparison to others. So even if you're not consciously, trying to compete with the people around you, the thing that we love about group exercise is the camaraderie. Having people around you doing the same thing, working hard, does naturally just make you work harder. So you do have to keep that in mind, that while you might not be consciously trying to match the person working next to you, you might be working a little harder than you would if you were working alone. And then, as always, we'll offer modifications. Take those as needed. Especially our group exercise will be outside to begin with. So we'll have environmental considerations to contend with. So those modifications might include cooling down a little bit early, finding some shade if you're hot. And then with being outside, you'll also want to make sure you're properly hydrating throughout the day and the night before, as well as, wearing sunscreen, wearing a hat if you need it. Those kind of things are going to factor into the intensity of our workouts as well. So I mentioned the RPE scale. This is just an example of one. So we'll kind of try to stay in that 4 to 6, 7 to 8 moderate to vigorous activity range first starting. After a couple weeks, a couple months, you can start to push towards the very hard and maybe even the max effort, but that's not something we want to return to right away. And then lastly, just some other things that could impact your return to training. A lot of us are getting back into a routine. That might mean transitioning from work from home to working from the office. That's going to impact your exercise, as well as adjusting to a different schedule. You might have a change in training direction. Maybe you want to try something new. Maybe you started something new while the gym was closed that you want to continue with. You might have different variations of that going on. And then, as I mentioned before, your nutrition, sleep, and recovery can also impact your workouts as well and your training intensity. So to kind of bring us all back, summarize, we have a lot of Power Station resources available. So like I said, we will be trying to guide this process for you if you're doing group exercise classes. But we have some other resources as well. You can come ask us any questions you may have. We have, if you feel like you really need some guidance coming back to training, we do offer personal training, and we'll be employing some new kind of movement and assessments in our fitness assessment process that can help with that as well. So be on the lookout for information about that. And just in general, we're going to try to take it slow and steady, have a lot of check-ins with ourselves, make sure we're not doing too much too soon or fatiguing ourselves unnecessarily, and just avoiding in general excessive fatigue so we don't get those delayed onset muscle soreness, and avoid overtraining. So we feel good, get back into some healthy habits, and get back into a groove with our physical activity. So the last question I'll leave you with is, how will you approach your return to training? So thank you all who called in today. If you have any questions later, you can definitely feel free to email us at the Power Station or chat with any of us on Teams. Hopefully we'll see a lot of your faces back next week when we open. But if anyone has any questions now, I can take those.
Hey, Bree, thanks for the summary. I had a question. Something I've been thinking about was maybe doing like an assessment kind of thing, like just to kind of see like where I'm at right now. Because I know I've done one in like prior years to compare to. Or do you recommend maybe getting back into the swing of things a couple weeks and then doing one? Like kind of what's a good gauge? I've definitely been out of consistency, I would say, in workouts, but I still kept up like a somewhat regular workout routine.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Since you have been doing some things, it wouldn't be a bad idea to do an assessment. The thing I would be worried about is some of the processes in our assessments are more towards that like 1 rep max style, the maximum push-ups and sit-ups, and the cardiovascular running test. Some of those can be a little bit stressful to your body if you haven't been doing that type of activity. But if you have some baseline, like which it sounds like you have been doing, it could definitely be helpful to kind of guide your training, to figure out if you're trying to get back to where you were when you took your last assessment, what we could do to do that. So for you, definitely, I think we could consider a fitness assessment in the first couple weeks. Someone who hasn't been doing anything over the whole break, we might want to give them a couple weeks, even a month, to just kind of start moving again before we do an assessment like that.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
So Bree, you guys can do the full-on assessments now?
Yes, we can do assessments. We have some new processes that we're going to have to get used to, but we are going to start doing movement-based assessments, which is going to be our main focus, which are, they're really awesome, especially they look at a lot of like muscle imbalance stuff, which we haven't done before. So those are going to be really great. So we probably won't do a whole lot of those right off the bat just because we got all the other stuff going on, but we can look at scheduling some of those soon.
Is that the old Fusionetics thing or different?
Yes. Yeah,
So
that's Fusionetics.
Finally got the green light to do it, huh?
Yeah, we just gotta figure out how we're gonna implement it, but that's coming. So we'll definitely have some more information about that soon.
Oh, good.
All right. Well, thank you guys all for calling in. Hopefully, like I said, we'll see most of you next week or in the next couple of weeks coming up. Thanks for calling in and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Bye.